station building, this bit on the end here is not original. The rest of it is. That bit on the end there, we added after we took over the line. That's our admin offices.
Oh, check tour. Are you booked on it? We are, yes.
Originally opened, this was the goods yard, and the platform was as long as it is now. We've extended the platform since we took over the line. So where the ramp up is to the footbridge now, there was a set of points on the main line that gave access to the goods yard here. That worked quite well until one day the Midland Railway were shunting the yard. The points were set for the main line. A wagon wasn't braked properly. It rolled out into the main line, and there was great surprise and consternation at Oakworth as this wagon suddenly shot through the gates, carried on through the platform and carried on down towards Ingrove, and eventually came to a rest at Keighley, where the line levelled out a little bit. So the Midland Railway had a quick rethink about this, and they turned the whole thing round again. So when this was a goods yard for most of its life, there were buffer stops at this end, so if anything did run away, it was just going to hit the buffers and not go any further. Up there you've got the goods shed. Everything in front of the goods shed, to the left of the goods shed, we've added on. This building here is a replica of Midland Railway stables at a station this sort of size. It wasn't here originally, but that is the original Weybridge hut there. Weybridge is gone. If you go to Oakworth, the original hut is still in the yard at Oakworth, as is the Weybridge itself. So when the line first opened, there was a level crossing here. The bridge at the far end of the yard didn't exist. The main turnpike road from Keighley to Hebden Bridge came down what is now Mill Hay. It came across what is now the forecourt, and then it crossed on a level crossing here. When you go back on the platform after the tour, you go down to this end of the platform and look down there on the bank, you'll see a set of cobbles. That was the original turnpike road to Hebden Bridge. We discovered that when we were doing some work there last year, and having dug up the old cobbles, that's what the road used to be like, we left them after we'd finished the work. So have a look at that when you get back on the platform. Still delivers coal from the railway goods yard. One of the few railway goods yards left in the country where you've still got a working coal merchant. You know, it used to be a time when every goods yard in the country had at least one coal merchant serving the locality. You went to some of the big cities, you went to somewhere like St Pancras. I mean, St Pancras had a total yard dedicated to coal, separate from general goods. But we still have a coal merchant here. Unfortunately, his coal doesn't come in by rail, but on his letter heading, it still says as his address, LMS Goods Yard, Haworth. So here's the original cobbled surfacing of the yard here. Crane you can see here. So let's talk about the crane first of all. If you have a look at the axle boxes on the crane and its attendant vehicles, you'll see LMSR on the side of it, London Midland Scottish Railway. And I want to take you back to November 1952. We are on the West Coast Main Line out of Euston. We're at a place called Harrow and Wealdstone on the northern suburbs of London. Harrow and Wealdstone station had 6 platforms. It had 2 on the main line, 2 on the slow lines, and 2 on what they called the electric lines. Back in those days, there was a DC electric service out of Euston as far as Watford Junction and Watford High Street, which was shared during the peak hours by the Bakerloo line. So this particular morning, when, as I say, it's November 1952, and back in the 1950s, London and a lot of other big cities were particularly affected by fog and the smog. If you think back in those days, every house you saw around you here would have had coal fires. Any industry would have coal-fired boilers for steam, for processes they did, or just for heating or powering other bits of machinery. So, you know, it was quite a smoky atmosphere in London back in those days, and you quite often used to get the fog or the smog, which was even thicker. On this particular morning, this is what you had. It was playing havoc with the timetables. Running down the main line from Scotland was an overnight sleeper train from Scotland. It was running late because of the weather. Coming out of Euston, going north, was a train to Merseyside. who was running on time. He just left, so he was just starting his day. And meanwhile, pulling into the up fast platform, which was unusual because it should have gone into the up slow platform, was a stopping train picking up commuters. It started from Tring further up the line and was now heading down into Euston. He's pulled into the platform, he's stationary, everybody's getting on, ready for their day down in the city. Behind him is coming the express. The crew missed sighting the distant. Had they done so, the disaster would never have happened because that was at caution. The next thing they saw was the red light of the home signal protecting the rear of the stationary train. They desperately tried to stop the train, were unable to. It passed the red signal, it hit the back of the stationary commuter train. If that wasn't bad enough, you've still got your express racing north. The signalman, rather than seeing anything, he heard something, realised something was wrong and immediately threw all his signals to danger. Unfortunately not quick enough to stop the northbound train, which ploughed into the wreckage and brought down on top of the wreckage the station footbridge. Now, it was carnage. There's a very good book published by Oakwood Press which tells you the whole story of how it happened, who was involved, and about the recovery from it. The recovery was done remarkably quickly. These days it would take them weeks, mainly because they'd have to build a road in first of all to get a crane in to lift the wreckage, whereas every major depot used to have a crane like this. Now, every heritage railway in the country at some time or other has acquired bits of rusting metal because it was a good idea at the time. It might have been given to them or it was sold to them very cheap. This is an example. British Railways were getting rid of their steam cranes. This came up for grabs. Group of members here, we'll have that, brought it here, and it just sat here rusting, as did a lot of other bits and pieces. Our directors said, look, we need to tidy up at Harrow Yard, and at that point somebody started researching this crane. And this crane suddenly went from being a pile of rusting metal to something of quite historical importance in the annals of British Railways, because this was one of the cranes that responded to the Harrow and Wealdstone disaster. There were 3 cranes went to it, one from Wealdstone, one from Rugby, and one from Old Oak Common. This was the one that was at Wealdstone. So there is a gang now who are restoring it. 2 years ago, the jib was still here, all the hawsers were still here, the boiler was sat in the back. They've all been taken away, either to be measured up for replacements to be made or to be repaired. And they're usually here. They're called the Thursday Gang because it's the day they're normally here. Most Thursdays you'll find them here beavering away on something on here. Last time I spoke to them, they reckoned, where are we now? 2024 now, aren't we? So they reckoned about 2026. Hopefully, she might be in a similar condition to the one down at Ingro, which is operational, and we'll have 2 operating steam cranes. Or steam breakdown cranes. We have got a 3rd crane at Grafton, which is operational. But
are you thinking of recreating the disaster?
no, we're not going to. Heaven did no. But I mean, the one that's down at Ingro, in the care of the Bahamas Locomotives Society, it is fully working. We have used it. We've used it for lifting boilers off locos when they need to be dismantled for works, or lifting boilers back on again. 2 or 3 times we've done that in the last year. And also we've used it for some of the preparatory work for the bridge replacement we're going to be doing in the autumn, just beyond the loco
Just to
yard.
add to your story, Steve,
Go on then.
one good thing that came out of the Harrow and Wealdstone disaster, if you can get good things that come out of a disaster, is the disaster wouldn't have happened if the automatic train warning system had been in operation. That was being, in terms of cost, it was being objected to by the directors of the railway companies, but they agreed finally after that disaster to implement the automatic warning system. So a good thing came out of it. Although 112 people lost their lives.
12 people lost their lives,
Unfortunately.
yeah. Oh, the other thing is, Haworth Yard and Shed is haunted. It is. There's a guy in the summer who runs ghost tours of Haworth, and it's one of the stories he tells as well, so it must be genuine. But no, it is. few years ago, before we built Stanley House, which is our volunteer accommodation, over there where that DMU trailer is, on that siding over there, there used to be an old sleeping car where our volunteers used to stop for the weekend or the week if they were here for a week. And their routine normally was at the end of the working day, they put the locos to bed, make sure they were okay, lock up the shed, have a good wash, and then off they go to one of the local hostelries for a bite to eat and a couple of pints to wash it down. Then they'd wander back here, turn back in to their bunks in the sleeping car, and one of them, before he turned in, would always go and check the shed, make sure it was still okay. Particularly if it was a sort of a Saturday night, for example, you might find that you've got a loco ready for the following day in light steam. So you just go make sure there was plenty of water in the boiler for that, and okay, everything's okay with that. As he walked down the yard, coming down here and down between where that DMU car is and that shed's there now, he saw a light. He thought, well, there shouldn't be a light on down there. We switched all the lights off before we went out. I'll go and investigate. As he walked down a little closer, he could see a figure of a man. And as he got closer, this guy seemed to be beckoning to him. He also seemed to be holding in his other hand a shunter's pole. Now, back in the days when we used to have loose coupled goods trains, you used to either the guard or you'd have a dedicated shunter who'd be there with a pole with a hook on the end. He could lift the couplings off and on, in a lot of cases while the wagons were moving quite slowly, and then he put the handbrake on to stop it exactly where it was needed. As he got closer, this figure disappeared. Now, back in the 1800s, the Midland Railway were operating here. There were 2 or 3 coal merchants based in the yard here. One by the name of Binns Bancroft. Now, Mr. Bancroft was quite keen. He was a Yorkshire businessman, you know, careful with his brass, and time was money, don't they know? So when the freight train used to arrive here and shunt his coal wagons off, he always insisted, the station staff, that his wagons would be the first ones off and down by his staith so he could get on unloading them, bagging the coal up and get it out around the village to his customers. And this particular morning he was a little bit too keen and he got knocked over by a wagon and killed. Did our colleague that night see the ghost of Binns Bancroft? Well, he had a lamp, he had a shunter's pole. Binns Bancroft would have borrowed a shunter's pole to uncouple his wagon because he wasn't going to wait for them to stop and uncouple it. He was going to do it all himself. I mean, he was a nuisance to the staff, but was that the ghost of Binns Bancroft? Okay, so if you'd like to just come and stand around here, so there's plenty of room for people to come across the room behind you. I want to talk about some of the beasts who are dwelling in here. Okay, so move over to this side, see a few more bits and pieces, and we'll get a better view of the Black 5 in a moment. So on the well troll here, you've got a Great Western Railway 5700 class 060 pannier tank, built at Swindon in the 1920s. This particular one spent all its working life with British Railways down in South Wales at various sheds, as did a lot of the 5700 class. The 5700 class was the Great Western's standard pannier tank class for many, many years. There were 1 or 2 modifications made over the years to them, modifications to cabs and bunkers and things like this, but basically, if you saw a 57, underneath all that, it was the same type of locomotive. Now this one, when British Railways were coming towards the end of steam, around about that time, London Transport, who at the time had a fleet of ex-Metropolitan Railway locomotives for working their engineers' trains, were looking to replace those because they were getting a bit ancient. So they approached British Railways and said, look, have you got any locomotives that we can buy off you that we could use on our engineers' trains? And they went, oh yeah, here you go. I think they bought about half a dozen of these. painted them into London Transport livery. When this arrived on the Keighley Valley, that's the livery it was in, the livery it was used in for a number of years. The brown livery you see it in at the moment is the livery we repainted it in when it was one of the stars of the original Railway Children film. And it then had on the side of the pannier tanks GN and SR, Great Northern and Southern Railway, that stood for in the script of the Railway Children. When its boiler ticket ran out, we put it into the exhibition shed at Oxenhope so that our visitors could see it, and it was pulled out of there late last year, brought down here and stripped down for an assessment as to what work needs to be done. And the boiler, you'll see just in front of the Black 5 in a moment on a low mat down there. The wheels are about somewhere, and the pannier tanks are down the side of Stanier House at the moment. So it's all in bits. Bits are all over the place at the present time, but they now know what work needs to be done, and it's in the queue to be restored back to running order. This set of wheels and frames here is from Hamburg. Hamburg has only recently come into the works to be worked on. Hamburg was a Hudswell Clark 060 side tank locomotive that was built for the Manchester Ship Canal. Manchester Ship Canal had quite an extensive network of railway lines serving the docks that the canal served and connecting in with the other docks in Manchester and of course with the main line networks. And so they just literally in the last few weeks started restoration on Hamburg, stripped her down. As you see, you've got your frames and wheels sitting here. Ending, the British Railways should acquire some of these. So they bought 5 of them, 6 of them. 5 of them are in preservation. They bought 6 of them. They came from Germany to the Hook of Holland. They were put on the train ferry across. This beast is unique. British Railways went to the English Electric Company, Vulcan Foundry at Newton Willows, and said to them, right, we're looking for a diesel locomotive we can use in our bigger marshalling yards. We want something a bit more powerful than our standard diesel shunter, what we now call the 08. So English Electric produced 2 of these. Externally they looked identical. There's this one, which had electric transmission, and the other one, which had hydraulic transmission. Now, those of you who know about diesel hydraulics on British Railways, no surprises. The diesel hydraulic version went to the Western region. It did visit Stratford in East London occasionally. I've seen some photographs of it at Stratford, but most of its time was spent on the Western region. In the end, British Railways said, it's a bit too powerful for what we wanted, guys. We wanted just to pull the skin off the rice pudding, not the whole rice pudding. So they went back to English Electric. Now English Electric very quickly, being able to find a customer they could sell them off to, they scrapped the diesel hydraulic one. But they kept Vulcan to shunt the works. And eventually, when they no longer needed Vulcan, she came to the Keighley Valley Railway on loan. Now, some of the gentlemen might know what happened to English Electric. English Electric no longer exists. Vulcan is still on loan to us from English Electric. So I think we can almost claim squatters' rights now, can't we? It is quite a powerful little locomotive. Last year we had a bit of a crisis for a few days where we didn't have a steam locomotive. Everybody woke up one morning ready to run the Saturday morning service, and the locomotive that was allocated suddenly decided she didn't want to play. So what to do? Hang on a moment, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll send Vulcan up to Oxenhope, we'll take 2 of the Suburbans and we'll run the service with Vulcan and the 2 Suburbans, and that's what they did. And I went down to Keighley to see her coming up Keighley Bank, up onto the GN straight, thinking this could be interesting, there could be some fireworks, and she just sailed up the bank. In fact, easier than the castle did with the goods train on Thursday morning. It slid North's way up there on the first one. So yeah, it's quite a powerful little locomotive, equally at home on our works trains and on a passenger service. So here's the boiler for the 5700, boiler and firebox and smoke box. We go this way. Locomotive at the moment. Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway 25 class 060 freight locomotive built by Bayer Peacock in Manchester in 1887. You might know this better, those of you who know the 1970s railway children's film as The Green Dragon. And until 2 years ago it still was in the green livery, rather lurid colour of green that it wore for the film, and it was then brought into the works and repainted into BR black. Quite a nice little locomotive. So your typical Victorian design, as you see if you look at the cab, nice open cab, not a lot of protection for the crew. Last year's steam gala, on the first day, on the Thursday, we woke up to find that most of this part of Yorkshire was covered in a blanket of snow. It was still snowing, in fact, when I woke up on the Thursday morning. I wasn't scheduled to work on the Thursday, and I decided I was going to take a walk and come out and watch the trains in the snow with my cameras. So I walked from where I live in Keighley, eventually walked up the Halifax Road, intending to take some photographs and point up the Halifax Road where it overlooks the Men's Loop and the Men's Box. Thinking I'll get some shots of the trains crossing in the loop in the snow. As I walked up through Ingrove Woods, I saw her coming down to Keighley with the first train, tender first, into the teeth of the blizzard, and the crew were tucking themselves as far as they could into the back two corners of that cab, trying to keep out the snow. And they experienced how it would have been for the Victorian loco crews. Later on in the day, the crew had managed to rig a storm sheet between the cab and the tender. You can see the hooks there and the eyes on the tender. That's where they rigged the storm sheet. So it was a bit more comfortable for them by then. Now behind her is one of our visiting locos for the gala, Pendennis Castle, built by the Great Western Railway at Swindon. Castle class, designed by Collett, and they were built mainly for express work. The Castle class primarily worked out the lines out of Paddington towards South Wales, Bristol, and up towards Birmingham. A lot of the expresses beyond Bristol down to places like Plymouth and Penzance were the province of the King class, which was slightly more powerful and bigger than the Castle class. The Western region, the Great Western Railway, had a system of classifying their locomotives. You see on the side of this one it says 2F, so it tells you it's a freight locomotive and it's a class 2 locomotive in terms of power. The Western region, we're having none of that nonsense. We'll put little coloured discs on the side of it. So the Castle class is a red engine. What the Great Western Railway had was the map of their system. They had a map of their system and the lines were coloured for the maximum type of locomotive that was allowed to work over different lines. So they went from uncoloured up to double red. Now the King class were double red locomotives, so very, very restricted in the lines they could work over. The next one down was the red, which was locos like Pendennis Castle there. And the uncoloured ones would be the very light lines, and they'd be the smallest of the tank locomotives that would work over those ones. So, when you've got your photographs,
come on. What's the rule? Very nice.
Come in, don't be shy. But I'll start.
Another local the other side of it. Green local.
Probably all recognise that as an 08. The standard, if you like, British Railways diesel 060 diesel shunter, based on a London Midland and Scottish Railway design. Go on. Yep. Find out. Let the workers through. Based on a London Midland and Scottish Railway design, this particular one was built at Darlington Works in 1957. But when they did build these, when British Railways were building these, they were built at virtually every one of their works. Right across the country, they had hundreds of these. There wasn't a marshalling yard, a depot or a goods depot somewhere in the country, certainly in the major towns and cities, where at some time or other you did not find one of these. This particular one, quite well travelled, been various places around the country. Its last depot before it was withdrawn was at Shirebrook, as it says on the side there, wearing that livery. Over in the main line siding, you can just see it out through the door there. We've got another 08, slightly different to this one. It started out looking like this one, but that's an 089, which is one of the 5 that were modified to work the Buddyport and Gwendrye Valley Railway down in southwest Wales, which had a restricted loading gauge. Basically, the Buddyport and Gwendrye Valley Railway took over an old canal that ran up the Gwendrye Valley, and they laid the tracks on the bed of the canal, which gave them quite a restricted loading gauge, which was great originally, and in the early days when they were running sort of 4-wheel or 6-wheel wooden-bodied coaches, which were, all had low roofs, and their locomotives were all off-the-books industrial types from people like Avonside, Shapman and Furneaux, Peckett. So they were called quite diminutive little locomotives. The Great Western Railway, when they took over that line, they set about, as the Great Western did with a lot of the lines that they took over, set about decimating the original company's locomotive fleet because they were non-standard, and replacing them with their own products, branch lines like that, usually with pannier tanks. What they did on the Great Western did on the Buddyport and Gwendrye Valley was they replaced them with a lot of 2021 class 060 pannier tanks, and then when they became life expired, they replaced those with the 1600 pannier tanks. And the 1600 pannier tank is probably the smallest of the pannier tanks that the Great Western built. They were considerably smaller than the 5700. So they fitted under the canal bridges. When steam finished at Llanelli Shed in 1964, they replaced the steam locomotives there for working the Buddyport and Gwendrye Valley line with some 03 diesel shunters. Now, the 03 diesel shunters were quite small and quite compact, but even then they had to take 4 inches off the height of the cab for it to fit under the canal bridges. We then came to a point where the 03s were becoming life expired and needed to be replaced. Now, they did consider taking a Class 14, as we saw in the shed just now, and cutting some of those down. They decided not to. One of the big problems they had on the Buddyport and Gwendrye Valley, because it was an old canal, there were certain areas that flooded. And one of those was just outside Buddyport, where the line went under the main line to Carmarthen and Fishguard. In steam days, there used to be a flood gauge by that bridge, and if the water rose to more than 10 inches, all services had to be stopped, because otherwise the water would have got into the firebox and put the fire out. So with diesel locomotives, similar sort of problem. Now, I told you our 25 is a way being worked on at the moment, because when Bridgehouse Beck overflowed a few years ago, it got flooded, all the water got into traction motors. So diesel electrics, they couldn't use diesel electrics on the original line. So what they did was they closed the original line from Buddyport as far as Trimsaddon Junction, and they opened up an old link from Kidwelly up the valley. They took 5 08s and they basically did a top slice along the whole length of it to reduce it down low enough to go under the bridges. If you have a look at the cab of 08993 that's sat out there, you'll see instead of this sort of nice arc that 08266 has got to its cab, the cab on 08993 sort of goes up, across and down again, quite angular cab roof. Perhaps to get it under the bridges. That worked well, till one day one of the 089s failed, and they sent one of these up the valley to rescue it. We got to the first bridge, there was a loud crash, and the whole body went back at an angle of 45 degrees, and they produced the first italic 08. Never did that again. Another product of English Electric. English Electric got a lot of business out of British Railways over the years. These were introduced in 1963. This particular type with the split headcoat boxes here, they initially went to the eastern region. A lot of them went on the Great Eastern lines out of Liverpool Street, equally at home on freight and on passenger. These quite often worked the Harwich boat trains. They worked, certainly before the Cambridge line was electrified out of Liverpool Street, they worked a lot of Cambridge services. Now, when you get to the other end of this one, have a look at the nose at the other end. It's different. Originally, it would have had a nose like this, but all locomotive classes from time to time have accidents. At some time or other, this one somewhere has had a coming together with, I suspect, another locomotive in a shed somewhere, resulting in damage to the nose. But a lot of the major depots used to carry spare noses and spare cabs for locomotives, because it was a fairly quick job to then cut off the old nose and weld a new one on, and then get it back into traffic if that was the only damage to it. So that's what's happened to this one at some stage or other. You get down the other end and you'll see it's got a totally different nose with a totally different light configuration. While we're stood here, just take a look up, guys. I told you this was the goods shed for Harrow. Stand back and let the man through with a cup of tea.
Very much. Thank you.
So this was the goods shed for Harrow originally, and up there you've got a hatchway there. There would have been a hoist up there originally. If you look at the painted on the wall still up there, it says floor load 300 weight per square foot. So at busy times, bearing in mind we had a lot of mills in the valley here, a lot of mills around Haworth, you'd have had a lot of wool coming in and going out, and wool products coming in and going out. If it got a bit too busy and you needed to store additional storage space, you take it up on the hoist and store it upstairs. Walk down this way.
Oh yeah.
Gather around here. There's two things I want to talk about down here.
Oh yeah.
The first one is over here in the corner here, which is another original feature of the goods shed, which is this beautiful wrought iron spiral staircase going up to the upper floor, which was being used by the staff to get up there.
Sorry.
That's all right. No, go on. Yeah. No, you're one point way on. And then behind us, here's a feature you would have found in every steam shed back in the days. And this will be the board that would have told the shed foreman what locos he'd got on shed and what the disposition of them was, which were available for traffic, which ones weren't. So, in all the traditions of a good steam shed, we've got one. Ours also features the diesel fleet down there. So, over here we've got the steam locomotives with both steam and diesel. Our system.
Steve, sorry.
Go on.
Can we just move around a bit?
Move around a bit, yep. Yep, move around a bit, guys. No problem. So this is sort of, it's the TOPS computer, if you like, of its age, before computers came along. We have a simple colour code. If it has got a green diamond next to it, it means it's available for traffic. With the steam locomotives, it might not be in steam, although it probably is today. But normally it might not be in steam, but at least it's available for traffic, it's fit to run, and all you've got to do is light a fire, put some water in the boiler, in a couple of hours time you'll have a head of steam and you can use it. If it's got a red square, it means it's out of traffic for whatever reason, and you'll either find the reason chalked onto the tag, or you'll find it somewhere along the board here. So at the moment, Today, the only two that aren't available for service in the steam fleet, that says Green Dragon, but that's a lie because it's in steam out there at the moment, and that's the Black 5. It says the Green Dragon is due for a washout. Maybe they're going to do the washout later today. But then you've got spaces for the date of its last boiler inspection, its last mechanical inspection, and then you've got your weekly tally of when they've done various things to it, mileages, things like this. No? Right. With the diesels it's slightly more simple. The date the air tanks were last tested and the date of its last annual examination. So you look at the locos here at the moment. Well, there's your class 20. Well, we know it's out of traffic because it's got its bogies out from underneath it. There's the 14, which we've seen tucked down the back of the shed there. That D32 is the one outside under the awning. Everything else, apart from Merlin, I'm not too sure where Merlin is at the moment, but it's stopped anyway. Everything else is available for service if needed. Oh, apart from the 25, which of course is away at Barrow Hill. Right, let's come through. Right, so the wheel drop is another one of these things. I told you earlier on we were outside looking at the breakdown crane. This is one of these things where it comes up, the opportunity arises to acquire it, and you think, yeah, we'll have that. We don't use it that often for dropping wheels, but it is useful, it is there, potentially could be a money earner if another railway needed to drop the wheels on a loco that they could get here, and they hadn't got a wheel drop, because the only other alternative to get the wheels out from underneath the locomotive is to have a big heavy crane that can lift it, so that you can lift up one end, take the wheels off that end, and then lift up the other end and take the wheels off the other end. The way it works is you bring a loco in here. Now if we wanted to take that pair of wheels off Big Jim, you'd have to remove the coupling rods, you'd have to disconnect all the brakes, you'd have to disconnect all the bits underneath that hold everything together, and then once you've done all that, you start up the motor, pull the little lever, the table will drop down with that set of wheels on it down into the pit there. You then move the locomotive out the way, and then you can raise the set of wheels back up again, and then you can do what you like with them. Work on them in here, you can take them out to the workshop, or you can take them out to be craned onto a wagon or a lorry to go away somewhere else for work to be done. And then the reverse process when you want to put it all back together again. So, the locomotive though, one of our film stars. Another one of our film stars, I should say. You've seen two of them already, the pannier tank and the ironclad, and here's Big Jim. Now Big Jim is the American version of the WD-280. We saw the frames of the WD-280 in the workshops, and this is the American version of it. During the Second World War, while the Americans didn't sort of come along until after the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, at least they were doing things for the war effort prior to that, although this one didn't come along until 1945. But prior to 1945, the Americans had built quite a few locomotives which had been shipped across to Europe and to the United Kingdom to work on the railways and to replace locomotives that had been destroyed in bombing raids. So I've seen a photograph, for example, of about a dozen of these down at Edward Junction shed in Newport in South Wales, having been shipped across from the States. This particular one was built in 1945 at the Lima Works in Ohio, and she was shipped straight from the United States across to Europe. Having arrived in Europe, she followed the Allied forces as they went through Europe towards Germany, hauling troop trains, hauling munitions trains, hauling trains that carry materials to rebuild the European railways that have been devastated by the German and the Allied bombing. She eventually found a way to Poland, what is now Poland, or was Poland in those days, into Poland. And there she stopped at the end of the war. She was taken into the Polish State Railways fleet and continued to work for them, hauling goods trains. Now, those of you who know your European history will know that at the end of the Second World War, what we called Eastern Europe after that was sort of partitioned off from what we called Western Europe, and initially was administered by one of three powers: the British, the Americans, or the Russians. Poland was administered by the Russians. So the poor old Poles, they probably got a bit of a rough deal out of it, out of the whole thing at the end of the day. And certainly when everything settled down in Europe, and the American and the British forces in Europe were really what we called the British Army of the Rhine in the sort of the 60s and the 70s. They were there because of the Cold War. The Cold War that then developed between us and the Russians. They were there as a security force, a fast reaction force if the Russians decided that they were going to do a similar thing to what they did to Ukraine in more recent times and invade. The Polish State Railways then came to the point where they were withdrawing steam, modernising their fleet, and Big Jim, 5820, came up for withdrawal. At the time, one of our members was working for the diplomatic corps and was stationed at the British Embassy in Warsaw. And being a railway enthusiast, when they go abroad, always like to try and see something of the railways, by hook or by crook. I know I do. Because he was stationed in Poland and was working in Poland, living in Poland, he very quickly made friends with a lot of Polish railwaymen and a lot of people connected with Poland's equivalent of our National Railway Museum. And that opened a lot of doors to him, obviously, because his friends would say, "Oh, come down to the local depot, come on Wednesday, we've got such and such in." So when he was talking to one of his Polish friends and they were telling him about this locomotive and how they wanted to put it in the museum, but the Soviets, as soon as they heard that it was American built, put a block on it, because it had been built by the Americans, who were of course now the enemy. So they were quite upset, the Poles, because they wanted to put it in their museum really as a tribute to both the Poles and the Allies who had sacrificed so much to free their country from the German occupation in the Second World War. So our member said to them, "Leave it to me. I might know somebody who can help you." So he went back to his office at the British Embassy, he made a few phone calls back here to Yorkshire, and the next thing he was able to deliver some good news to them and say, "Yep, I know of a railway in Yorkshire, more than happy to take your locomotive." So she was taken to the North Sea ports, put on a ferry to Hull, came across, put on a low loader, and then made her way across on the M62 to sunny West Yorkshire, and she's been here ever since. When she arrived, she came straight into service because she was in full working order. She went straight into service, still as she was when she left Poland, which wasn't like this. She was black, painted black, and had lots of modifications the Poles had made to her between the end of the Second World War and when she was withdrawn. She was subsequently rebuilt here back into her original form as you see her now. But her film star role, that first came along when they were making Yanks, which starred a minor celebrity called Richard Gere. Have you heard of him, madam? Heard of him, madam? Richard Gere? I know ladies of a certain age, some ladies of a certain age regard Richard Gere as a bit of a heartthrob. Didn't do anything for me personally, but hey ho. As I say, that was Yanks. We've got some photographs in the archives that show them filming it. They filmed a lot of it on the railway here, and they filmed a lot down in the old Midland goods yard at Keighley, which is where the Sainsbury's supermarket is on the opposite side of the road from Keighley station. More recently, she's appeared in The Railway Children Returns. Now, The Railway Children was made in the 1970s. Starred Jenny Agutter as one of the main characters, as one of the children. And living up in Howard Village is a lady who is a bit of a screenwriter, a bit of a director in the film world. And she came up with this idea of, let's bring the Railway Children story into more recent times. So she wrote a screenplay revolving around the Second World War. The Railway Children in her story were evacuees from Manchester and Salford who'd been brought to the countryside away from the city because of the German bombing in the Second World War. Has anybody here not seen it or planning to see it? Because I don't want to totally spoil the story for you. Basically the story is these three children are brought from Salford, they arrive in Haworth. Jenny Agutter now plays the grandmother of her grandson who is stopping with her daughter, while her daughter's husband is away fighting the war. She takes in these three children from Salford, and The Railway Children Returns is about their adventures with the grandson in and around Oakworth Station. Originally it was intended that Bernard Cribbins would take part in the film, and he was going to have a cameo role in it. His grandson was going to be the porter at Oakworth Station. Now the guy who was playing his grandson still appeared in it, but unfortunately during the filming Bernard Cribbins was unwell, and they wrote his appearance out of the script, although there were nods to him in the film and mentions to him in the film. So Big Jim appeared in that and was really the star of the show in that, in terms of locomotives and railways. When the film was released, the world premiere, which would normally be held somewhere like that there, London, down the road, was held in Keighley. It was held at our little picture house in Keighley. All the cast, including Jenny Agutter, Sharon Smith, who played her daughter, the kids, some of the other key actors, they all pitched up at Oxenhope. We put on a special train hauled by Big Jim down to Keighley, from where they then went up to the cinema, up to the picture house, with a lot of our staff and volunteers. You had all the usual things you get at a world premiere, speeches by Jenny Agutter, by the screenplay writer, the director, and one or two other notable worthies. You got all the hangers-on, stars from something called Coronation Street and Emmerdale. But more importantly, you had the cast there, and you had our people there as well. About a week later, they held the premiere in London, in that there London. Jenny Agutter went down for that, Sheridan Smith went down for that, but we were the ones who had the full cast, all the key members of the cast at the world premiere. Big Jim was starting to show her age last year. Towards the end of last main season, she was struggling a little bit. There were a couple of times when she had a few problems, so she was taken out of service. Her boiler ticket has run out subsequently in any case, so she's in here for you to have a look at, but she awaits her turn on the shopping list. So that concludes your tour, ladies and gentlemen. Unless you've got any more questions, we'll take you back out into the yard and escort you back towards the station, where you can enjoy the rest of the steam gala.